She walked into the place she built from the ground up, a dealership that carried her name, her vision, her legacy. But instead of a warm welcome, she was met with cold stares and a voice telling her she didn't belong. They didn't know who she was. They didn't care. In that moment, power, success, and status meant nothing. Only the color of her skin seemed to matter. What happened next would shatter assumptions, ignite outrage, and leave everyone questioning how something like this could still happen today. The dealership was quiet after Daniel's abrupt exit, but Alicia knew the silence wouldn't last. The confrontation had unfolded in front of customers, employees, and more than a few phones held at discreet angles. She could already imagine the clips being uploaded, shared, and dissected online. By the time she returned to her office, the world outside her glass walls was already buzzing. Within hours, her phone began to vibrate with notifications. Texts from friends, calls from journalists, emails from people she hadn't spoken to in years. The video had gone viral. Strangers tagged her in posts praising her composure and courage. Others shared their own stories. Different details, same pain, of being underestimated, doubted, or outright denied because of the color of their skin. The comments were a mix of outrage and solidarity. Some viewers expressed disbelief that something like this could happen in the 21st century. Others, particularly black business owners, said they weren't surprised at all. This happens every day, they wrote. The only difference is you had the power to fight back. And that truth hit Alicia hard, because she knew, painfully well, that most people in her position would have been escorted out that day. They wouldn't have been given a chance to prove who they were. They wouldn't have been listened to. And even if they were, the damage, the humiliation, the erosion of dignity would still have been done. She thought about what would have happened if she'd been dressed differently, if she hadn't had her ownership documents in her bag, if she'd walked in on a day when her name wasn't fresh in the minds of staff. She thought about the way Daniel had looked at her, not just with ignorance, but with the confidence of someone who believed the system would back him up. That was the part that lingered. It wasn't just about personal bias. It was about the quiet reinforcement of a system that allowed those biases to flourish without consequence. But this time, there would be consequences. By the end of the week, Alicia had issued a public statement. She didn't just talk about her own experience. She talked about the bigger picture, the countless stories that never made headlines, the subtle ways racism still poisoned workplaces, the necessity of training, accountability, and leadership that actually reflected the communities it served. She didn't name the employees involved, not because she wanted to protect them, but because she wanted the focus to be on the pattern, not just the people. Fire one person, she told a reporter, and you've solved the symptom, changed the culture, and you start to cure the disease. Her dealership underwent a complete review. Hiring practices were reevaluated. Staff training became mandatory, and leadership was reshaped to ensure diversity wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet, but a lived reality. Alicia even invited community leaders and activists to speak at the dealership, turning the place into a platform for dialogue and education. The viral video had opened the door, but Alicia was determined to walk through it and pull others along with her. She started a foundation aimed at supporting minority entrepreneurs in the automotive industry, providing mentorship, resources, and financial backing for those trying to break into a field that had long been dominated by gatekeepers. The ripple effect spread far beyond the dealership. News outlets ran segments on implicit bias in customer service. Other business owners shared how the incident made them reevaluate their own staff training. People who had never considered the possibility of discrimination in a luxury showroom suddenly found themselves asking hard questions. Still, for all the positive change, Alicia knew the story had stirred up the other side too. The ones who claimed she was making about race, the ones who insisted the employees had been just doing their job. She read the comments, not because she wanted to, but because she knew ignoring them wouldn't make them go away. They were proof of why her fight wasn't over. On a quiet evening weeks later, Alicia returned to the dealership after hours. The showroom was empty, the cars lined up in perfect symmetry under the soft glow of the lights. She walked between them slowly, her heels echoing on the polished floor. It was the same space where she had been told to leave, but it didn't feel the same anymore. She paused in front of her office door, running her hand over the familiar handle. This was still her place. her legacy. But now, it was also something more, a reminder that even when you climb to the top, the weight of prejudice can still try to push you down. She thought of the messages she'd received from strangers all over the country. The young woman in Texas who had been denied entry into a store until her white friend arrived. The black father in Ohio who was ignored at a dealership until a white customer asked for help. The stories blurred together into a truth she couldn't unsee. Racism didn't always come with slurs or threats. Sometimes it came with a smile, a policy, or a question that shouldn't have been asked. Alicia turned off the lights and locked the door behind her. As she stepped out into the night, the air was cool, carrying with it a sense of unfinished business. She knew the viral video would eventually fade from the headlines, replaced by the next story to capture the internet's attention. But the work she had started, the conversations, the reforms, the community outreach would continue. Because this wasn't about one bad manager or one humiliating morning. It was about dismantling the quiet, everyday assumptions that still held too much power in this world. She thought about her mother's words again. No matter how far you climb, someone will try to pull you back down. That might be true. But what her mother didn't say was that sometimes, when they try, you get the chance to pull others up instead. And that was exactly what Alicia intended to do. The footage of that day had been watched millions of times. People would remember the confrontation, the firing, the moment she stood her ground. But Alicia hoped they'd remember something else too. That power isn't just about owning a building or having your name on the sign. It's about using your position to make sure the next person doesn't have to fight the same battle you did. She climbed into her car, the engine humming softly as she pulled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, the dealership sign glowed in the darkness, her name shining against the night sky. It was a reminder, not of her victory, but of her responsibility. And as the road stretched out ahead, one thought rose above the rest. How many more times will this happen before the world finally changes? Alicia stood in the middle of her own showroom, but in that moment, it felt like foreign territory. The two men who had intercepted her moved with a strange kind of authority, as if their job wasn't to welcome customers, but to decide who deserved to be there in the first place. She recognized the dynamic instantly, the unspoken hierarchy that determined who was allowed into certain spaces. And despite everything she had built, everything she had accomplished, they had placed her firmly at the bottom. The first man's eyes skimmed her from head to toe, not in admiration, in assessment. He didn't see a CEO in a tailored suit. He saw a black woman standing alone in a luxury dealership. And in his mind, that didn't add up. Like I said, ma'am, customers wait over there. He repeated, sharper this time. His body blocked her view of the hallway leading to the offices. The same hallway she had walked countless times with her head held high. Something in Alicia's chest tightened. She knew what this was, even if they hadn't said it outright. She also knew that if she played along, if she smiled and waited in the lounge, it would be like agreeing with their assumption that she didn't belong. And Alicia Carter had never been the kind of woman to accept that. "I'm here to speak with the manager," she said, her voice steady. The man's brows furrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. "The manager's busy. Do you have an appointment?" An appointment in her own building. The absurdity almost made her laugh, but there was nothing funny about the look in his eyes. He didn't believe she had a reason to be there, not a legitimate one. Anyway, from behind him, she could see a few customers browsing cars, their conversations hushed, glances flickering toward her like she was part of some quiet spectacle. She felt it, the invisible circle of otherness, closing in. "I'm sure the manager will want to speak to me," she replied, her tone unyielding. Before the man could answer, a third employee approached. This one wore a different uniform, likely security. He had a clipboard in one hand and a faint smirk on his face, as though he'd already decided the ending to this scene. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his eyes never leaving Alicia. "No problem," the first man said quickly, "just making sure our guest is in the right place." Guest. Alicia knew what that word meant in this context. Someone temporary, someone who didn't belong, someone who could be asked to leave at any moment. The security guard shifted his stance, now blocking the other side of the hallway. It wasn't overtly aggressive, but it was a wall nonetheless. Alicia's pulse quickened. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was a deliberate message. You're not welcome here. She took a breath, her mind racing through options. She could identify herself right now, drop the truth like a hammer, and watch the shock ripple through their faces. But something inside her told her to wait, to see just how far they were willing to go. "Can you tell me why I'm being stopped from entering the office area?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge. The security guard chuckled, not kindly. "We've had some issues lately. Need to make sure people aren't wandering where they shouldn't be." Wandering. The word stung. She thought about the hours she had spent in those offices, negotiating deals, approving sales, mentoring staff. And now she was being treated like a trespasser. As if on cue, another employee, a young woman in a crisp blazer, emerged from the office hallway. Alicia caught her eye, but the woman glanced away quickly, muttering something to security guard before disappearing again. Every second that passed chipped away at the normalcy of this visit. This wasn't just awkward anymore, it was hostile, and Alicia could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had dealt with subtle racism before, the kind hidden behind polite smiles and careful words. But this was different. This was direct. And the worst part? It was happening in the one place she thought she'd be immune to it. She took a step forward. "I'm going to speak to the manager now." The guard's voice hardened. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to wait. Or leave." Leave. In her own dealership. The audacity of it was almost surreal. A small crowd of onlookers had formed near the lounge, their curiosity piqued by the quiet tension in the air. Alicia could see the questions in their eyes. Who is she? What's going on? But no one stepped forward. No one challenged the narrative that she was just another person who didn't belong. In that moment, a memory flashed through her mind. Her mother's voice, years ago, warning her that no matter how far she climbed, there would always be those who tried to pull her back down. Alicia had thought she was ready for that reality. She hadn't expected it to come from inside her own empire. Her decision was made. She wasn't going to back down. "I'll wait right here," she said, planting her feet. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. The employees exchanged glances, clearly unsure what to do next. Finally, the first man pulled out his phone and dialed. Alicia didn't know if he was calling the manager or someone else, but she didn't take her eyes off him. Moments later, a tall man in an expensive suit strode out from the back. His expression was tight, his steps deliberate. Alicia recognized him instantly. Daniel, the new general manager she had hired just months ago. But instead of greeting her, Daniel looked at the others first. "What's going on here?" "This woman says she needs to speak with you," the security guard replied, his tone dripping with implication. Daniel turned to Alicia, and for a brief second, she thought he would smile, explain the misunderstanding, and restore the dignity of the moment. But his face remained unreadable. "Do you have an appointment?" he asked. Her heart sank, not because of the words themselves, but because of the betrayal laced within them. This was someone she had trusted to represent her business, to embody its values. And here he was, treating her like an intruder in front of staff and customers. "No," she said evenly. "I didn't think I'd need one." Daniel's gaze flickered, but he didn't move aside. Instead, he sighed and gestured toward the exit. "We're busy today. Maybe you can come back another time." The air seemed to vanish from the room. Alicia could feel every eye on her, waiting to see what she would do. She thought about all the deals she had closed in this very space, the speeches she had given about breaking barriers, the pride she had felt every time she saw her name on the sign out front. And now, she was being asked to leave as if she were nothing. This was no misunderstanding. This was a choice to believe she didn't belong. She didn't move. The tension in the room was palpable now, the kind that makes people lean in, unable to look away. And just when it seemed like the standoff might break, Daniel's voice cut through the silence again. "If you won't leave, I'll have to ask security to escort you out." It was a final confirmation. They had no idea who they were dealing with. And Alicia decided, right then and there, that if they wanted a scene, she would give them one they'd never forget. Alicia Carter had always been a fighter, born and raised in a small working-class neighborhood. She grew up watching her mother juggle two jobs just to keep the lights on. By the time she was 12, Alicia knew that life wasn't going to hand her anything. She'd have to build it herself. And she did. Through long nights of studying, endless networking, and a fierce determination that left people in awe, she climbed from an intern position at a tiny used car lot to owning one of the most successful luxury dealerships in the state. Her name wasn't just on the building. It was a symbol. Every polished car on the showroom floor, every handshake with a customer, every late-night call with a supplier, all of it carried a piece of her. Alicia's dealership wasn't just a business. It was her legacy. She took pride in hiring a diverse staff, training young salespeople, and creating opportunities for those who were often overlooked. On the outside, her life seemed untouchable. She lived in a beautiful home on the edge of the city, drove the latest model from her own showroom, and was invited to speak at business conferences across the country. She was a picture of success, but Alicia knew better than anyone that success didn't erase prejudice. She'd seen it in sideways glances at board meetings, in the subtle hesitation before a handshake, in the way some people's smiles tightened when she introduced herself as the owner. Still, she believed she could rise above it. She believed her hard work and track record would speak louder than any bias. And most days it seemed like they did. But the truth was, Alicia hadn't been to the dealership in weeks. Her schedule had been packed with meetings, speaking engagements, and charity events. She'd left daily operations in the hands of her trusted managers, confident they could handle it. That Friday morning, though, something told her to stop by unannounced. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was a desire to walk among the rows of gleaming cars she'd worked so hard to sell. Maybe it was just missing the hum of her own business. The sky was still pale when she pulled into the lot, her heels clicking against the pavement as she walked toward the glass doors. She noticed a few employees inside, moving between desks and display vehicles, their faces unfamiliar. It wasn't unusual. Turnover happened, but the lack of recognition was striking. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of leather and new paint. She ran her fingers lightly across the hood of a sedan, a model she'd personally negotiated to add to their inventory. She was halfway to the office when a voice stopped her. "Ma'am, can I help you?" The man standing in front of her wore the dealership's crisp uniform, black slacks, branded shirt, name badge. His tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't welcoming either. Something about the way he positioned himself, blocking her path, fell off. "I'm just here to look around," she replied, keeping her voice even. "Customers wait over there," he said, gesturing to a lounge area. "I'll get someone to assist you." It was subtle, almost forgettable, but Alicia felt a prickle at the back of her neck. This wasn't the greeting she was used to in her own dealership. She glanced toward the glass-walled office where she'd spent countless hours. But another man had stepped into her path. In that moment, Alicia felt a tension she couldn't quite name. Not yet, but it was there, curling in her stomach, whispering that something wasn't right. And before the morning was over, that whisper would become a roar.